Yeah, I will start soon with introducing the panel members to the stage. But first, I would very shortly say something about. No, first I will actually bring the participants to the stage. Arjen Oosterman, chief editor of Volume magazine. Their next issue will be about architectural criticism, and Arjen will tell, amongst other things, more about that soon. Indira van het Klooster, chief editor of FA10 New European Architecture, and recently author of the book Reactivate, with a lot of innovators of Dutch architecture. And Mark Studdle, of editor-in-chief of Arcello, who I will soon join on the couch. But not before I've said something short about the article that was published on failed architecture and what stirred this. It's them against me, I think. But, and what actually mainly focuses on who are the ones that should be discussing architecture. And this is an example which yeah, it's so extreme it becomes sort of comical, but it is really from Arch Daily. And what you could say, in a cynical way, say what happens when you ask architects themselves to talk about their buildings. And it turns out that then there's a lot of very sustainable buildings in this world. There's a lot of villages that are saved by new buildings in this world. And context is something that is actually always taken very seriously. In this case, it refers to local stone paintings and weaving patterns. In a way, it does, I assume. But it was actually, and the debate that followed on it was the reason why we want to talk with some people that know a lot about it, about this theme of architectural criticism. And that was strengthened by one of our the fourth member we would have liked to have in this discussion, a critic of a big newspaper in Holland. And he actually said that to talk about architectural criticism again was really something that was something for young and naive people. But he was actually kind of fed up with discussing his own profession. And that sort of gave the perfect introduction for us to discuss it here with extra attention, I believe. And I would like to start with asking Arjen how if you see on this one side a lot of online media that's let really a lot of the architects and the readers, the architects explain the building and the readers can comment on it. And on the other hand, the big newspapers in Holland that seem to have lost, if I can, their interest, how they position themselves in this field of architectural criticism, and what they think of the current state of affairs.
That's a lot of questions to answer. Well, the young and brave are sitting here to explain you all about current position in architectural criticism. And a Volume, and if you're not familiar, this is Volume, the magazine we make, is a critical architecture magazine because it confronts the questions of today. So therefore, it has to be critical. It doesn't report, it confronts. That's I'd say my definition of being critical. In relation to current, well, maybe not discussion on architecture, but coverage of architecture in either dailies, weeklies, or monthlies, the situation has changed indeed. And one of the things that has changed is that the discussion has broadened immensely. So many more people are engaging in discussing or reflecting or responding on something that happens in their environment or that they're confronted with. This is tremendous, this is great, this is really interesting. The effect, let's say the by-effect of that is that the voices that had the stage before are less clearly heard. And that is a problem for those voices probably, but it is also probably a problem for architectural culture in a wider sense. Well, that is a theme that I'd like to discuss, but this is as a kick-off, first impression, my response.
Because your next issue will be also on this.
Yeah, the issue that we're currently preparing is on architecture criticism, or to be more exact, ways to be critical. And I think that defines more or less the way we approach it. So we try to understand the kinds of criticism that are currently occurring, also the changes in the landscape, if you compare, let's say, with the 90s, but even the 70s, and see what the situation today is, and also discover in this situation not only loss, because there is I'd say, an almost shared sense of loss. We lost something that was valuable and that we really cherished, and nothing has replaced that, it seems. So therefore...
And is that basically on the sort of do you see this loss on the in-depth side, or can you define this loss a bit more specific?
Well, that exactly is what it's said to be lost. The in-depth exploration, discussion on certain themes and topics related to architecture, but also very basic, the valuation of what's being produced. So there's a lot of publicity, but that's not necessarily evaluative publicity.
I would like to go to Mark. You are, as I said, the chief editor of an online platform, as you also strongly sort of put it as a platform. And in the talks we had before, you were pretty strong on the advantages you see in this shift and this maybe misunderstanding of a loss. Can you explain?
So basically, Ian talks about ways of criticism. Arcello is no criticism, really. It's a very objective way of presenting projects. Our mission is to present the world's projects and products and provide a platform where visitors can make their own mind up about projects and discover the project and learn about it. So we provide really no criticism, but we do provide a criteria of choosing projects to feature and to present. And in my opinion, I think yes, architecture criticism is dwindling, but that's probably through the power of the web, where you have many people being able to make their own comments by themselves, independent comments.
But is this objective position and saying we are not critical? Is that the right answer to an absence of criticism?
The criticism comes from our visitors and not from the critic. So many of our visitors can visit the projects, they can provide their own criticism and open up a debate and make it more of a two-way conversation between the architect and possibly even the users of the building and the visitors of the building.
We get back to that. I would like to go into Indeed. You, with A10, but also with Reactivate, have a very clearly, you position yourself as a stimulator, or a sort of to give architecture. Am I saying it correct? To be part of the podium you give to architects.
Yeah, Well, I think architectural criticism doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be against things, or that you have to think that everything is bad, or that things are bad. It can also be about finding trends and reflecting upon what's happening. And I think for me it's important with A10 and also in Reactivate to find the new tendencies in architecture, and to find the people that kind of redefine either the profession or the building industry or the meaning of architecture. And I think for A10 it's more or less a community of architecture journalists, because Europe has 27 countries, and from every country we have several contributors that send in the projects from their respective countries, and we make a selection of that, and that gives us the opportunity to have an overview of the production of architecture in the whole of Europe, and then find related buildings or trends or things that are different or new or related in all kinds of things. And this, what fascinates me most in architecture or in architects, speaking about utopia and heroes and survivors, that maybe a few years back the hero would be the architect and the survivor would be the user or the civilian, but now it's completely the other way around. The architect has become the survivor, and the way they do survive in these times is really, really fascinating to me. And I think that's what I would like to convey in the magazine and also in the book.
Yeah, but shouldn't there, if you take that role of highlighting the good, what is happening, do you agree with Arjen that there's, or where do you see the problem in the writing about it, that it might not be sort of all good, or how do you find this critical?
Well, I do not actually see a problem, but that's mostly because as we're trying to reflect on what's happening, it's more that the kind of questions change. For me, at the moment, what's really, really fascinating is the way architects refuse to be political, or refuse to be ideological, most of them at least. And the one way could be to say, the next generation of architects, they're really shallow, and they don't think, and they don't think it's important to, etc., etc. But on the other hand, I think they are really, really committed to society and the things that are changing. And I think the fact that they are non-ideological is not so much that they don't care about society, or that they're not thinking in terms of politics, but that they are somehow not related to politics as such, which is interesting to see in Holland, in the Reactivate generation, where they're really kind of pragmatic yet committed. But even in Turkey, on Taksim Square, many architects there say this is not an ideological strife. And this is really interesting. How can protesting against a government be not ideological or not political? But they actually do say this is not a political thing. This is about, of course, we are against the intransparency of the architecture and the government, and we are against the way things are happening here. But this is not because it's a left-wing discussion or a right-wing discussion. It's much more about bottom-up things.
So the problem, or you see actually that architects refuse to take a stand.
No, they do take a stand, but not from the old-fashioned way of looking at politics or looking at political points of view.
But what kind of stand?
Based on society, for example, on bottom-up movements, on communities, on things like vacancy, or on healthcare issues, or on...
and how do you try to write on this?
So what we're trying to find is the way people, or architects, use or work with this reality. So we find the projects that do reflect the way they think, and why we think it's important.
It's a bit strange to call that non-political on the first hand.
Definitely.
And secondly, it's you're giving a voice to certain streams, what you define as streams in your book, Reactivate, and therefore make choices. You select and you organize, you structure.
But I'm not saying
so
I'm not political. I'm saying architects say they're not political.
Yeah, they say they're not political.
But they are.
Do you buy it?
Of course not. They are
political.
political.
Don't buy it. That's fine.
No, they do. Of course, they do take a stand.
All right.
And they do have opinions.
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't necessarily. What's interesting to me is that if they say they're non-ideological, I would like to know why and how and because they do show commitment to society, and they do take a stand. So it's a matter of words, and words is very much part of architecture critique. So for me, it's important.
Is that in relation to, for example, Foster's work in the rich country Kazakhstan, and he's built the huge building for the corrupt dictator, for example, and he has no political ideology there.
Yeah, well, FA10 is writing about the young officers and the ones that are coming. So we don't do any star architects. So as such, we do not critique that or even review it because we are looking for the new movements and the new offices. And they do not build these high big.
But I think to focus on the how to write about it, how to discuss it, I think what you actually say this new stream of architects that then should be less ideological. How would you think they could better be written about and discussed?
Yeah, well, there's two problems. There's one that we simply lack the language to discuss these new streams or this new type of production, because it's not so much about, like you indicated, about, let's say, composition or the standard set of beauty or stylish aspects. It's about other elements that create or that are added by these architects. There's another kind of intelligence added to the process of building or creation of space. And let's say the critics are not well versed in discussing production in these terms. So part of the problem is to invent a language to discuss these things. And another aspect to it is that these products, and that is very interesting about your book, let's say these offices are sort of invisible because they can't show off with their creation because they don't produce objects. They add elements to society, or they allow society to shape for itself, more or less. Sometimes, not always, but that is part of the new approach. And these bottom-up like developments, you can't authorize them as easily, and thereby it's far harder to discuss them. So yes, there is indeed a problem in discussing these things. And why it is a problem, it's not so interesting to discuss it as a problem, but at least as something that is the reality of the day. If it's true that in the old days, architecture criticism related to production, that there was what we like to call feedback loop of criticism into the production, into the profession, then nowadays this link, this loop has been broken. And that changes the reality of today. Then it's a matter of evaluation. Is this a problem? Is this right or wrong? Is this better or worse than we were 10 or 20 years ago?
I think
reality.
And
you can accept reality and you can challenge reality, right?
Talking about this reality, and we can put on the screen the most visited architectural website in the world. I think with around 1 million likes on Facebook and huge amounts of monthly visitors. I think we're talking millions. And it's not layouted, it's not edited, and it's a lot of comments, so to say, on architecture. And that is one of the ways Mark gave me as an example to deal with this new reality. One as the being the reality, that this is now part of how architecture is discussed, but also you try to incorporate it in this loop. Arjen talked about how to get back to the architect.
Absolutely. I think it's ironic that so many architects and so many critics actually don't value Skyscraper City as a place to get feedback and to receive feedback on their projects, where on here you actually have all of the users of projects, the public, hundreds of people actually discussing, debating a project, and critiquing it themselves. And it's a missed opportunity for a lot of architects to get feedback on their projects. And in the web, and Web 2.0 is basically giving architects the possibility to get this feedback that wasn't possible before.
But does it have, is it not too superficial to be of added value, also for an architect or for a discussion?
I think if you have users of the building debating on how it works and what could be better about a building, then there's always very added value critique there for the architect to learn from. And in the past, architects possibly took more attention listening to critics rather than the users of the building, where ideally they should be listening to the users of the building and taking on their feedback. And this is an ideal way for them to do that.
Indira, do you see this then as a threat, or?
No, I think at its best it's a way of attracting a much wider audience to architectural debate, and I think it actually works like that, like more websites do. And even it could be a way of architects starting to write about their own work again, if they could rely a little bit less on their PR employees and try and formulate themselves what they'd like. A few years back, I also did a discussion on architecture critique, and I tried to, because what I found was that it used to be very, very common for an architect to write about his own buildings, years and years back in magazines like Forum and Archis and etc. And this has completely been taken over by architectural journalists writing about architects. So what went missing was first-hand information of the architect about his own building, or what he thought, what his ideas had been, or what his ideals had been. And these kind of websites could actually be a way, a step forward again for architects to write about the project themselves. What lacks, of course, is a kind of deeper reflection on what it actually means and how these projects relate to each other and what it says about the times we're living in.
Can I make one correction? I think these architects that you talked about wrote about their colleagues, and that was so interesting.
Yeah.
There was an exchange
Yeah.
on opinions and ideas in architecture, and thereby, in exchanging these ideas, they created, let's say, the norms and the ideas what good architecture is. This shared notion of good architecture. And
Actually, I think this is getting back. It's not in writing at the moment, but with all these small offices that work together on different projects in different settings all the time, I think there is much more interconnection between architects at the moment than, let's say, 10 years back.
But in the media we see hardly any time an architect strongly criticizing another architect.
or defending.
Or defending. On the other hand, we might now see sort of the interaction between PR on the one hand and the opinion of the crowd on the other hand. I would like to go to Arjen to, is there a role or even a responsibility for the critic here to highlight maybe the facts that are not so easily seen or are maybe not told by people who have a stake in presenting their building as a very good building?
Well, responsibility, there's none actually, but there may be inspiration and ambition, and that would be in the line of contextualizing. So first, understanding, there's curiosity. My main driver if I speak for myself, it's curiosity. I try to understand. And to create understanding, you have to, at least as far as I'm concerned, create context. And that creates a certain kind of understanding of what is at hand, what is presented, or what you see. And that takes an effort. That is not something, oh, I have an opinion. No, it really needs some time and reflection and investment in energy. That's getting harder and harder. That's another discussion, but at least I think that is still a valuable contribution to general understanding of what architecture also is. Because this is architecture, the way it functions, the popular vote, if you like. But there's also another dimension to architecture, and that won't be disclosed by these kinds of platforms.
Because it needs more research, knowledge, and you were also hinting towards maybe architecture, young architecture offices are drifting away from the product to also broader fields, which makes it
process, yeah, for instance,
which makes it harder to discuss them.
Yeah, but not impossible. But again, it requires a certain energy, and that kind of energy you can hardly expect from people who are simply responding on their own situation. It is a different kind of relating to. Not less real, absolutely not. Not less valuable, no. But it's also valuable.
I would like to see, I personally would like to see critiques more evolve into maybe moderators and curators where they bring the users and the architects together, and then they can make conclusions from both sides of the critique and use that information more to use it in future projects, really. And there's still a need for architecture critique, but maybe more in the moderation sense, where they choose what to highlight and how to bring across the feedback from the users.
Can you turn the mic? Yeah, all right. I'm just curious, do you ever envy the art cellos and art dailies of this world, or can you imagine that you would ever collaborate with them?
Sure.
For the record,
Art
cello has
problem.
300, for what it's worth, but has over 300,000 likes on Facebook. It's an enormous reach. So I can imagine with your criticism and critical thoughts, you could contribute also to the added value that Art Cello can have for the community.
Absolutely. We're an open platform. We already work with a number of magazines that contribute to Art Cello, and we started to work with curators to start making collections and an open debate, but we're still not going to do any critique ourselves.
It's so interesting that you say we don't do any critique ourselves. You haven't disclosed yet how you collect your material.
We collect our material by asking architects from all over the world to present their projects on the platform. It's an open platform, so they join and they present their projects, and designers present their products.
But how are the information you get? Is it judged or questioned?
It's an open platform, so you can put any material on that you like on Art Cello. There is a curated section, which is the featured section, and what we feature is based on a number of criteria. For example, whether it's a recent building, whether it's got a good text, a written word.
But don't you see the danger there?
In becoming subjective, do you mean?
Yeah, no. No, I might get a little bit subjective, but by actually, because the clear choice to be objective is, of course, not as objective as it sounds.
No,
No.
yeah.
I assume you have a sort of you took the choice conscious to take that decision.
Yeah, we made a conscious choice not to basically be subjective, but you can never be 100% objective. So we basically, we do choose the project, but we choose what's relevant.
I would like to have it the other way around. I think architecture critique cannot be objective. It has to be engaged, and it has to be committed, and it has to be from a certain point of view. If you're objective, you get a collection of data, but in the end, I think that's why something like Skyscraper City could never be alone as such, because in the end, people need some kind of moderation on that too. I think it's important to present from all the production that's being done all over the world, architecture-wise, to present a kind of collection of what you think is important for the outside world, for architects, for anyone who wants to know. So that means moderating content, either in a magazine or in a website or in an exhibition. It doesn't really matter as such. I think for FA10, what's really interesting is that maybe the outcome of the project can be the same. It can, in every country we see projects dealing with vacancy or reuse or a transformation of buildings, but the way they got there in all these respective countries is completely different. It's completely different to look at a reuse project in Bulgaria than to use a reuse project in Ireland, because the culture is different, the social circumstances are different, economics are different. Within these bigger backgrounds of architecture, you have a different story to tell. And on the scale of Europe, it's really interesting to see all these different stories relating to some kind of how do you say, new trends or new things that happen, something like that.
Would you like, before I give some time for questions to the audience, would you, Arjen, like to take a last reaction?
Final words.
No, because the added value of
different roles here at play. You are, let's say, acting like a censor with your magazine, first of all, on developments that are occurring, and you're selecting the ones that you cherish or that you think are important to share with your audience.
And to put them into perspective.
And to put them into perspective, right. You say, okay, I'm not in between, I'm just, information is flowing through my machine, and it comes to an audience almost uninterruptedly. Not completely true, of course, because you're totally dependent on those guys and girls that want to upload on your site, and that, of course, has also selective mechanisms in itself. It is not an objective view on this is happening in the world. It is, with different means and in different ways, a selection of what is occurring. Because these are the projects that these offices think worth sharing, and for some reasons, right? It is in that sense. It's advertising, that's promotion of their work. Our position is more to sense what can be done and to explore options and possibilities, challenges and opportunities. And that doesn't say you have to do this, but at least take this serious and be aware. And that can be illustrated, if you allow me, with two issues, and that's also a reference to Ole, who will act here later on. Two issues that 2006 predicted the crises, early warning, I'd say, and this one, 2007, promoting or telling about the possibility to act unsolicited, which was totally ridiculous at the time, and nowadays is almost norm for an architectural practice.
So your next issue on architectural criticism will...
Well, again, predict the future, of course.
Your book on the future is not that small, like the one Matthias had. That's really the great power of volume. You're way light years ahead, so to speak, of reflecting and thinking about what might happen or what could happen and what does it mean. Whereas we are much more into what's happening today and trying to give a meaning to it. And I'm probably what you are doing.
Wait, what's happening in 1 hour?
What happened yesterday, maybe.
I would like